Welcome back to the Stephen A. Smith Show. Before I get on out of here, I had to talk about a story that's very, very important. And albeit indirectly, it involves...
What if the biggest threat to the WNBA right now isn't a rival league, bad ratings, or lack of star power, but the league itself? Because that's the uncomfortable question hanging in the air after what just happened. A single commercial, 30 seconds long, and somehow it managed to expose cracks in the foundation that the WNBA has spent years trying to hide. At the center of it all is Caitlin Clark, a rookie who has already become bigger than the sport she plays. While the league has spent decades fighting for relevance, she walked in and brought ratings, sponsors, and global attention with her. That should have been a victory lap. Instead, reports suggest it triggered panic behind closed doors. According to voices like Stephen A. Smith, the reaction from the top hasn't been celebration, it's been resentment. Not from players, not from fans, but from the very people running the league. The idea that one athlete could outshine the institution itself appears to have rattled the WNBA's leadership in ways no one expected. And here why this matters. This isn't just about marketing or endorsement deals. It's about control, it's about power, and it's about a league that finally got what it always wanted, only to realize it doesn't know how to handle it. When a player no longer needs the league for exposure, the entire balance of power shifts overnight. That's why this moment feels different. The silence from official channels, the awkward responses, the tension you can feel without anyone saying it out loud. Something broke when that commercial aired, and the fallout is just beginning. Because once a league starts fighting its own biggest star, the question isn't who wins. It's how much damage gets done along the way. It's hard to overstate how much damage a single commercial can do when it reveals a truth people aren't ready to face. Because when Caitlin Clark appears in a national ad, she isn't framed as just another rookie or even just another star. She's positioned as the moment. The camera treats her like the center of gravity, not a piece of a collective. And that distinction is exactly where the tension begins. This latest commercial didn't feel like WNBA marketing. It didn't lean on league logos, legacy messaging, or bigger-than-one-player slogans. Instead, it did the opposite. It made Clark the product, confident, independent, marketable without explanation. For fans, that's electric. It's the kind of visibility women's basketball has been begging for. But for league executives, reports suggest it landed very differently. Why? Because the league didn't build that image, and more importantly, it can't control it. Traditionally, leagues hold leverage because players need them for exposure, legitimacy, and income. That dynamic collapses when a player reaches escape velocity. Clark doesn't need league marketing to be visible. She doesn't need WNBA promos to trend. Her brand exists outside the ecosystem, and that's a nightmare scenario for any centralized authority. Insiders claim the timing of the commercial is what really strung. The WNBA has spent the entire season pushing a carefully crafted message. It's not about one player, it's about the league, the history, the collective. Then this ad drops and erases that narrative in half a minute. It reminds everyone, casual fans especially, that there is, in fact, one name driving attention right now. And that creates embarrassment. The league's own marketing often feels modest, safe, even dated. Clark's brand deals look sleek, modern, and global by comparison. When outside companies present your sport better than you do, it exposes gaps leadership would rather keep hidden. That's where frustration reportedly turned into anger, not because the commercial hurt the league, but because it highlighted who really holds influence. The rookie wasn't just selling a product, she was demonstrating independence. And once independence enters the picture, control starts slipping. That's when this stops being about advertising and starts becoming about authority. Here's the part that makes league executives uncomfortable, and it's something Caitlin Clark exposed without saying a word. For the first time in WNBA history, the league doesn't control the spotlight. The spotlight exists somewhere else, and Clark decides when to step into it. In most professional leagues, power flows in one direction. The league provides the platform, the exposure, and the paycheck. Players rise within that structure, not outside of it. That's how commissioners maintain order. That's how narratives are shaped. But Clark short-circuited that system almost instantly. Brands didn't wait for the league's permission. Networks didn't need WNBA promos to sell her story. She arrived fully formed, with demand already baked in. And that's where reports suggest panic set in. Because once a player no longer needs the league to be visible, the leverage flips. Suddenly, the league needs the player more than the player needs the league. That's not just rare, it's destabilizing. Executives aren't used to negotiating from that position, especially in a league that has historically emphasized structure, seniority, and collective identity over individual stardom. This is why the reaction hasn't been excitement, it's been stiffness, awkward silence, carefully worded statements, a noticeable lack of amplification from official channels. Fans noticed it immediately. When Clark's commercials went viral, the league's accounts didn't rush to repost or celebrate. In any other major sports league, that would be automatic. Here, it felt intentional. Critics argue that this silence is about control. If the league embraces Clark too openly, it admits she's bigger than the framework they've spent decades defending. And once that admission is made, everything changes. Salary discussions get louder. Revenue questions get sharper. Comparisons to other leagues get more uncomfortable. There's also the fear factor. If one player proves she can thrive independently, what happens when the next one follows that blueprint? What happens when stars realize they don't have to wait their turn or fit into a prescribed mold to win culturally and financially? That's the real threat Clark represents, not rebellion, but precedent. And according to commentators like Stephen A. Smith, this loss of leverage explains the strange energy coming from the top. It's not anger for anger's sake. It's the fear of irrelevance. The fear that the league's traditional power structure can't survive in a moment driven by attention, speed, and individual pull. And once fear enters the equation, reactions stop being rational. They become defensive. Which helps explain why the situation only keeps escalating from here. This is where the conversation stops being whispers and starts becoming unavoidable. Because when Stephen A. Smith stepped in, he didn't treat this like a routine sports debate. He treated it like an institutional failure, and that shift matters because Smith isn't just critiquing jump shots, he's dissecting power dynamics. According to Smith, the energy coming from the league office doesn't feel like pride. It feels like resentment, not toward the attention Caitlin Clark is getting, but toward what that attention exposes. Every time Clark lands a major commercial, it shines a spotlight on what the WNBA hasn't been able to do for nearly 3 decades, and that spotlight is harsh. Smith's argument is simple but brutal. When outside brands market your biggest star better than you do, that's not a coincidence, it's an indictment. It tells casual fans that the league isn't leading the growth of its own product. It's reacting to it, and executives don't like being reminded that they're no longer the smartest people in the room. He also pointed out something most people dance around. This doesn't feel strategic, it feels emotional. Smith suggested that leadership appears personally bothered by Clark's rise, as if her success undermines their authority instead of validating it. That's a dangerous mindset in any business, but especially in professional sports, where stars are the engine. The name that keeps surfacing in this conversation is Kathy Engelbert. To be clear, there's no public admission of anger or jealousy, but critics argue the league's actions, or lack of them, tell a different story. Silence where celebration should be, corporate language where urgency is needed, missed opportunities that feel intentional. Smith didn't accuse the commissioner outright. Instead, he framed it as insecurity. When leadership can't control the narrative, it tries to slow it down. When it can't slow it down, it questions the messenger. That's where resentment creeps in. And that resentment doesn't stay contained, it trickles. According to Smith, this attitude at the top helps explain why hostility toward Clark feels normalized in certain corners of the league. If executives treat her success like a problem instead of a gift, it sends a message, subtle but powerful. It tells everyone else that celebrating her too loudly isn't encouraged. And once that tone is set, the damage compounds. Because this stops being about one commentator's opinion and starts looking like a leadership blind spot, one where protecting ego matters more than protecting momentum. And in a league that's finally found its moment, that might be the most dangerous mistake of all. This is where the theory takes a darker turn, and it's why so many people are paying closer attention now. Because critics aren't just talking about commercials or marketing anymore, they're talking about culture. Specifically, how the attitude at the top may be influencing what's happening on the floor. There's been growing chatter that the way Caitlin Clark is treated during games feels different. Hard fouls, late contact, blindside hits, plays that sit in a gray area where intent is hard to prove, but patterns are hard to ignore. On their own, each incident can be brushed off as physical basketball. Taken together, fans and analysts argue they tell a different story. Here's the speculative part, and it's important to frame it clearly. Some commentators believe that when leadership appears cold or dismissive toward a star, it subtly removes the protective bubble that usually surrounds valuable assets. In most leagues, when you have a player driving ratings, ticket sales, and attention, officials and enforcement bodies are hyper-aware. They set a tone. Respect is non-negotiable. But critics argue the WNBA hasn't done that convincingly. Discipline has felt slow, responses have felt vague, explanations have felt corporate instead of decisive, and that creates space for interpretation. If the league doesn't rush to defend its biggest draw, what message does that send to opponents? Not an explicit green light, but an absence of a red one. Stephen A. Smith has hinted at this connection without making a direct accusation. His point is that there's some coordinated effort. It's that tone matters. Culture flows downhill. If executives are annoyed by a player's stardom, that discomfort can seep into how the entire ecosystem responds to her presence. This is how resentment becomes normalized, not through official memos, but through silence, through inconsistency, through a lack of urgency when urgency is required. And fans notice. They see how quickly other leagues clamp down when stars are targeted. They compare reactions. They ask why the response here feels softer. Those questions don't come from nowhere, they come from watching patterns repeat. None of this is proven fact, it's interpretation. But in professional sports, perception shapes reality almost as much as policy. If players believe they can be more physical without consequence, they will be. If referees believe letting them play is acceptable, they'll do it. And once that environment is established, it becomes very hard to walk back. Which raises an uncomfortable possibility. The league's internal discomfort with Clark's rise may be unintentionally creating a more hostile on-court reality. And if that's even partially true, the consequences go far beyond marketing. Because now, the league isn't just risking momentum. It's risking trust. To really understand why this situation feels so tense, you have to understand the philosophy clash at the heart of the WNBA. For decades, the league has been built around a collective-first identity. The messaging has always been about the shield, the movement, the idea that no single player is bigger than the league itself. That approach made sense when visibility was scarce and survival depended on unity. Then along comes Caitlin Clark, and she completely disrupts that model. Clark represents something the old guard isn't comfortable with: pure, individual-driven demand. She didn't need years of league storytelling to become relevant. She didn't wait her turn. She didn't fit neatly into a seniority-based hierarchy. Fans chose her organically, and brands followed immediately. That kind of rise doesn't ask for permission, and that's exactly why it creates friction. The league office has spent years trying to sell the WNBA as a unified product: history, parity, depth, and culture. Clark's brand partners sell something very different. They sell her. One face, one name, one story. From a business standpoint, both approaches can coexist, but philosophically, they clash hard. Critics argue this is why moments like the Olympic roster decision stirred so much backlash. Leaving Clark off the Team USA squad wasn't just framed as a basketball decision, it was interpreted as a hierarchy move. A message that no matter how popular you are, you still have to wait your turn. That mindset may have worked in the past, but it collides head-on with the modern attention economy. Advertising doesn't care about tenure. Sponsors don't reward patience. They reward relevance, right now. And Clark's relevance exposed a gap between how fast the outside world moves and how slowly the league office adapts. This is where resentment can quietly grow. From the old guard's perspective, years of groundwork feel overshadowed. From the outside world's perspective, the league looks like it's resisting the very thing it always claimed to want, a true crossover star. And that tension isn't about personality, it's about control. Collective systems depend on predictability. Individual stardom introduces volatility. It shifts bargaining power. It changes negotiations. It forces uncomfortable conversations about money, marketing, and priorities. The WNBA didn't lose control overnight, but Clark's rise made it obvious that the old playbook no longer works on its own. And instead of adapting quickly, critics argue the league has hesitated, trying to slow down a moment that can't be slowed. Because once fans decide who they care about, no amount of institutional messaging can undo it. And that realization is at the core of why this conflict feels so raw. It's not about disrespect. It's about a league being dragged into a new economy before it's ready. This is the part of the story where everything tightens up, because once money enters the conversation, excuses stop working. According to critics like Stephen A. Smith, the real reason this situation feels so tense isn't jealousy alone, it's exposure. Every major commercial featuring Caitlin Clark forces the public to confront a reality the league would rather keep quiet. Clark is appearing in polished, high-budget campaigns that look like NBA-level marketing. Then fans look up her WNBA salary and do a double take. The gap between her off-court value and her on-court pay becomes impossible to ignore. That contrast doesn't just make the league look underfunded, it makes it look unprepared. In a normal sports ecosystem, a breakout star lifts everyone. Commissioners celebrate because endorsements mean eyeballs, eyeballs mean ratings, and ratings mean leverage in media deals. But here, the problem: Clark's commercial success is moving faster than the WNBA's financial structure, and when growth outpaces infrastructure, leadership gets defensive. Critics argue this is why the league's response feels awkward. Every time Clark headlines another national campaign, fans ask uncomfortable questions. Why is the league's revenue sharing so limited? Why are star salaries so low if interest is exploding? Why does it feel like brands understand the value of women's basketball better than the league itself? Those questions land squarely at the feet of Kathy Engelbert. Engelbert was brought in as a business-minded leader, someone expected to modernize the league and capitalize on growth moments exactly like this. But instead of controlling the narrative is controlling her. Smith has suggested that what looks like anger may actually be fear. Fear that Clark's success is highlighting systemic shortcomings. Fear that owners are noticing how much momentum is being generated outside official channels. Fear that the league's slow, cautious approach is being exposed in real time. There's also a scarcity mindset at play. Rather than seeing Clark's popularity as an expanding pie, critics believe leadership views it as competition for credit and control. If Clark becomes too big, the league risks looking small by comparison, and no executive wants to be the one blamed for fumbling a once-in-a-generation opportunity. So instead of leaning all the way in, the league hesitates, it downplays, it stays quiet, and that silence speaks louder than any press release. Because when a star forces financial questions you're not ready to answer, resentment becomes a shield. And shields don't build leagues, they stall them. This is where the situation crosses into dangerous territory for the WNBA, because it introduces something the league has never truly had to deal with before: optionality. For the first time, the biggest star in women's basketball has real leverage beyond the league itself. And according to critics, that reality is making leadership deeply uncomfortable. Here's the uncomfortable truth: Caitlin Clark does not exist in a closed system. She isn't financially dependent on the WNBA. She isn't dependent on its marketing. And she isn't dependent on its approval to remain relevant. That alone flips the traditional power structure upside down. There's been growing buzz about alternatives, new leagues, overseas opportunities, startup ventures that offer equity, flexibility, and control. One of the most talked about examples is Unrivaled, a player-driven league promising higher pay and ownership stakes. Clark hasn't publicly committed to anything, but that's not the point. The point is that she could. And that possibility changes everything. Traditional sports leagues rely on exclusivity. They hold the keys. Players negotiate within the system because there is no viable alternative. But Clark's commercial success has shown that the audience follows her, not the framework. If she decided tomorrow to play somewhere else, millions of eyeballs would follow. That's leverage the WNBA has never had to account for. Critics argue this is why the league's posture feels stiff and defensive. When a player has options, the league has to adjust how it treats them. Respect becomes a necessity, not a courtesy. And if leadership instead responds with coldness or resentment, it risks pushing the very asset it depends on toward the exit. This is where fear likely replaces anger. Fear that the league needs Clark more than Clark needs the league. Fear that mistreating or minimizing her could accelerate conversations the WNBA isn't ready to have. Fear that the old assumption, they have nowhere else to go, no longer applies. And that fear shows up in strange ways. Silence instead of celebration, distance instead of partnership, control instead of collaboration. None of it is explicit, but all of it is noticeable. Because once a league realizes it no longer holds all the cards, every decision becomes heavier, every misstep becomes riskier, and every public snub, no matter how small, carries consequences far beyond one season. At this point, the question isn't whether Clark has leverage. It's whether the WNBA knows how to operate in a world where she does. At this point, the conflict has outgrown any single commercial, interview, or controversy. What's really happening is a collision between an old system and a new reality, and history shows how these collisions usually end, not with compromise, but with adaptation or collapse. The WNBA is facing something it has never faced before, a player who embodies the zeitgeist. Caitlin Clark didn't just catch fire because of marketing or media hype. She became a cultural figure because fans decided she mattered. And once that happens, institutions lose the ability to dictate relevance. They can only respond to it. This is the part critics like Stephen A. Smith keep circling back to. You cannot micromanage organic popularity, you cannot slow it down, and you definitely can't punish it without consequences. The more resistance fans sense from the league, the more protective they become of the player. That's how narratives flip. Suddenly, the institution looks like the antagonist. We've seen this before in other sports. Leagues that tried to suppress star power instead of embracing it eventually got dragged forward anyway, usually after losing trust, time, and money. The smart ones learned quickly that stars don't diminish leagues. They define eras. They become the entry point for casual fans who might otherwise never care. That's why this moment feels so pivotal. The WNBA can lean into what's happening and modernize its approach, or it can cling to old structures that no longer fit the attention economy. One path expands the pie, the other shrinks it. And fans are watching closely. They notice who gets amplified and who doesn't. They notice silence. They notice deflection. They notice when celebration feels forced or absent altogether. In an age where authenticity drives loyalty, those signals matter more than press releases ever will. This isn't about favoritism, it's about reality. Clark didn't ask to become the face of women's basketball, but she became it anyway. The market decided, the audience decided, the culture decided. The only decision left belongs to the league itself. Because when the moment chooses a star, fighting it doesn't restore control. It only proves that control was already gone. This is the crossroads the WNBA can't avoid anymore. Not next season, not after another media deal. Now, because what Caitlin Clark represents isn't just a surge in popularity, it's a stress test for leadership, vision, and adaptability. And stress tests don't lie. For decades, the league asked for attention. It asked for sponsors. It asked for mainstream respect. Now that it finally has all three concentrated in one player, the reaction, at least according to critics, has felt hesitant, defensive, and at times hostile. That disconnect is what people like Stephen A. Smith are really calling out. Not jealousy for its own sake, but fear of losing control in a moment that demands evolution. The uncomfortable reality is this: Clark didn't break the system. She revealed its limits. She exposed how unprepared the league was for a star who moves faster than committees, branding decks, and carefully worded statements. That's not her responsibility to fix. It's leadership. If the WNBA embraces this moment fully, celebrates it loudly, protects it consistently, and builds around it intelligently, the upside is massive. More fans, more money, more leverage in future negotiations. A real chance to transform women's basketball permanently. But if the league continues to treat Clark's success like an inconvenience instead of a catalyst, the damage won't be subtle. It will show up in trust, engagement, and long-term loyalty. Fans already sense the tension. They see what gets amplified and what gets ignored. They hear the silence when there should be applause. And in today's media environment, perception becomes reality faster than any internal memo can correct. This was never about one commercial. That ad just made everything impossible to ignore. It forced the league to confront a simple but brutal question: do you want to grow or do you want to control? Because you can't have both forever. The era of manufactured narratives is over. The era of organic stars is here. And whether the WNBA thrives or fractures in this moment will depend entirely on how it responds, not to Caitlin Clark, but to the future she represents. And once history looks back on this moment, it won't remember who resisted the change. It will remember who was smart enough to ride it.